"You can't board," said the pilot, but he had no idea it'd save his life. The morning Marcus Webb was turned away from his flight was the worst morning of his life. He was certain of that. He had ranked it carefully, the way a man ranks things when he is standing on a tarmac in the early October sun, with his bag on his shoulder and his boarding pass in his hand, and two pilots looking at him like he is a problem that needs to be managed, rather than a person who needs to get home. He had ranked it against the morning his father died, a Tuesday, raining, a phone call at 5:15 that had the specific quality of phone calls that arrive before the world is properly awake, which is to say, the quality of bad news that cannot wait for a decent hour. He had ranked it against the morning his marriage ended, which was not dramatic the way endings in films are dramatic, but quiet and exhausted, two people looking at each other across a kitchen table and understanding simultaneously that they had been pretending for longer than either of them could honestly claim was trying. He had ranked it against the morning he was passed over for the promotion he had been working toward for 3 years. Told with genuine corporate sympathy by a manager who used the word "unfortunately" 4 times in one sentence. Against all of these, standing on the tarmac of Lisbon's Humberto Delgado Airport on a Tuesday in October, this morning won. He had been in Lisbon for 9 days. It was supposed to be 7. A conference on sustainable urban infrastructure. Marcus was a civil engineer, specialized in municipal water systems, which was neither glamorous nor the kind of thing people asked about enthusiastically at dinner parties, but which he believed in with the quiet conviction of someone who understood what clean water meant to a city and what the absence of it meant to the people who lived there. The conference had gone well. He had presented on the second day, a 40-minute session that had attracted more audience than he had expected, and led to 2 conversations afterward that felt genuinely productive, the kind where you exchange cards and actually mean it. He had stayed the extra 2 days because a colleague from Nairobi had invited him to see the city properly, had taken him through Alfama on a warm afternoon, had eaten grilled fish by the river, had drunk wine on a terrace while the light turned everything gold. It had been good. It had been the kind of good that you carry home with you, that you try to describe to people and can't quite, because the description is always smaller than the thing. And now he was here, on the tarmac, turned away. It had happened at the foot of the boarding stairs. The passengers ahead of him had filed up without incident. He had presented his boarding pass, seat 24C, an aisle seat he had specifically selected because he needed to stretch his legs on the 4-hour flight to London, from where he would connect to Atlanta. And the pilot, a tall man with silver at his temples and the kind of square jaw that seems designed to communicate authority, had looked at the pass and then looked at him. And something in the man's expression had shifted. "Mr. Webb," the pilot said, "not a question. Not, yes. I'm going to need you to step aside for a moment." Marcus had looked at him. He had looked at the second pilot, younger, standing slightly behind the first with a clipboard and an expression that was carefully neutral in the specific way of someone who has been told to let the senior man handle it. He had looked at the stairs, where the last few passengers were filing up, and at the door of the aircraft, which was open and waiting, and pointed at London, and then Atlanta, and then home. "Is there a problem?" Marcus asked. "I'll explain in a moment," the pilot said. "Please step aside." He had stepped aside. He had stood on the tarmac while the remaining passengers boarded. He had stood there while the door of the boarding stairs was raised and secured. He had stood there while the pilot spoke quietly into a radio and then turned to him with the expression of a man who has made a decision he is not entirely comfortable with, but is committed to. "Mr. Webb, I'm going to have to ask you to return to the terminal. You will not be boarding this flight." Marcus stared at him. The morning sun was directly in his eyes, and he had to squint, and he was aware that squinting made him look either angry or confused, and he was not sure which was worse. "Why?" he said. "Your documentation has been flagged for additional review," the pilot said. "The airline's security protocol requires—" "My documentation," Marcus repeated. "My passport is valid, my visa is valid, my boarding pass is valid. What documentation?" "Sir, I understand this is frustrating." "What documentation has been flagged?" Marcus said, and his voice was very level, because he had learned over the course of 43 years that the times when you most want to raise your voice are precisely the times when raising it will cost you the most. The pilot looked at him for a moment. Something crossed his face. Not quite regret, but close to it. The expression of a man who is following a protocol that he did not design and is not entirely certain he endorses. "I'm not at liberty to specify. A member of the airline's security team will meet you at the terminal desk and explain the next steps." "The next steps," Marcus said. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience." He was not sorry. He was doing his job, which was not the same thing, and they both knew it. And the awareness of that knowledge sat between them on the tarmac like a third person who had not been invited. Marcus picked up his bag. He turned and walked back toward the terminal. He did not look back at the stairs or the aircraft or the pilot. He looked straight ahead at the glass of the terminal building, at his own reflection approaching. A man in a tan jacket with a backpack and a phone and a boarding pass that was worth nothing now, walking in the morning sun across a strip of concrete that separated him from a plane that was going without him. He had no way of knowing, walking across that tarmac, that the plane would never reach London. The security desk at the terminal was staffed by a woman named Ana Ferreira, who had worked for the airline for 11 years and who had the professional compassion of someone who has spent a decade delivering news that people do not want to hear. She was gentle. She was efficient. She explained in clear and measured English that Marcus's name had triggered an automated security flag that was tied to an identity verification issue. Specifically, that a passport bearing his name and passport number had been reported as potentially fraudulent by an immigration authority, and that until the discrepancy was resolved through the airline's verification channel, he was unable to board. "My passport is not fraudulent," Marcus said. "This is my passport. I have had it for 6 years. I traveled to Portugal on it 9 days ago without any issue." "I understand," Anna said. "The flag was added recently. The verification process usually takes between 2 and 4 hours. I have a connecting flight in London. We will rebook you at no additional cost once the verification is complete. I have a meeting tomorrow morning." "I understand, Mr. Webb. I'm very sorry." She handed him a form. "If you could complete this, it begins the formal verification request." He took the form. He sat down at a row of seats near the window. He completed the form. He called his colleague in Atlanta and explained the situation in the careful, controlled voice of someone who is holding a great deal of frustration with both hands. He ordered coffee from a terminal cafe and drank it standing up, looking out the window at the runway. He watched his flight taxi to the runway. He watched it pause, engines building. He watched it begin its run, accelerating down the runway with the purposeful and unstoppable energy of a commercial aircraft committed to flight. And he watched it lift, the nose rising, the wheels leaving the ground, and he watched it climb into the pale morning sky over Lisbon, growing smaller, becoming a shape, and then a point, and then nothing. He sat back down. He stared at the form in his hands. He thought about the pilot's face, the expression that had been close to regret, but not quite. And he thought about the word flagged, which was one of those institutional words that sounded precise and meant almost nothing, a word that could mean anything from a genuine security concern to a clerical error to a computer system that had generated a false positive on a Tuesday morning. He had been flagged. That was all anyone could tell him. He had been flagged and left behind. He did not know that being flagged and left behind was the most important thing that had ever happened to him. Flight 447 to London. Heathrow departed Lisbon at 9:47 in the morning. It carried 162 passengers and a crew of 8. It flew northwest over the Atlantic, climbing to its cruising altitude, going through the ordinary choreography of a commercial flight, the seatbelt sign-off, the beverage service, the settling in of passengers with books and headphones, and the particular blankness of people who have given themselves over to the transit between places. At 1 hour and 14 minutes into the flight, at an altitude of 37,000 feet over the Bay of Biscay, the aircraft experienced a rapid decompression event. The details of what followed would be reconstructed later, carefully, by accident investigators who spent months examining fragments of what had been a routine Tuesday morning flight. What is known is that the decompression was severe and fast. What is known is that the oxygen systems deployed as designed. What is known is that the pilots, confronted with a situation that demanded immediate and correct decisions, made several of those decisions correctly and several incorrectly, which is what the record shows for almost every major aviation emergency, because humans under extreme pressure in rapidly evolving situations are human. The aircraft came down in the Bay of Biscay. It did not crash in the cinematic sense. It came down rapidly, not under control, but not in free fall either. And it impacted the ocean's surface at a speed and angle that was catastrophic in the engineering sense of that word. A failure so complete that recovery is not possible. There were no survivors. Marcus Webb heard about it in the terminal. He heard about it the way you hear about something catastrophic when you are in an airport and a catastrophe has occurred. In fragments at first, through the changed quality of the ambient noise, through the way the people at the information desk were looking at their screens, with an attention that was different from ordinary attention, through the way that 3 airline employees converged in a corner and spoke to each other with their backs turned. Then his phone rang. It was Anna Ferreira, from the security desk. She said his name. She said it twice, the way people say a name twice when they are preparing to say something else. "Mr. Webb, I need you to stay where you are. Someone from our team is coming to you now." "What's happened?" he said. She did not answer immediately. He heard her breathing. "What's happened?" he said again. "Mr. Webb," she said, "your flight." And she stopped. He heard her stop. He heard the pause that follows a sentence that the speaker cannot complete, not because they do not know the words, but because the words are too large for the moment. "Mr. Webb," she said again, "please stay where you are." He stayed where he was. He sat in the same seat, near the same window, with the same form in his hands, in the terminal of the airport he had been trying to leave all morning. He sat there while the information arrived in pieces, through his phone, through overheard conversations, through the television screens mounted high on the terminal walls that began showing the same rolling banner in the urgent red text that television reserves for the news that stops ordinary programming. He sat there and understood, slowly and then all at once, what had happened, what it meant. That seat, 24C, the aisle seat he had specifically selected so he could stretch his legs. Someone else had taken that seat when he was turned away. Someone else, or more likely, the seat had been released and left empty, one of 162 seats on an aircraft that was no longer anywhere it was supposed to be. He sat very still. Around him, the terminal was changing in the specific way that places change when something terrible has happened nearby, but not to the people in the room. A heightened and disoriented quality, people moving with more urgency and less certainty, voices dropping and then rising, a kind of collective recalibration of the seriousness of the day. Staff moved in purposeful clusters. Passengers gathered around the television screens. A woman near the coffee stand was on her phone, and her voice had the particular pitch of someone saying the words, "I don't know yet," to a person who loves them. A man from the airline came and sat beside Marcus. His name was Paulo, and he was from the passenger assistance team, and he spoke with the gentleness of someone who has been trained to sit beside people in the worst moments of their lives. He said that the airline was still gathering information. He said that a full emergency response was underway. He said that Marcus would be taken to a private area, that there were counselors available, that the airline would assist with anything he needed. Marcus listened to all of this. He answered the questions he was asked. He gave his information. He was calm in the way that people are sometimes calm in the immediate aftermath of something that has not yet become real. The calm of the space between understanding and feeling, which can last minutes or hours, and which fills itself with the bureaucratic details of a situation, because bureaucratic details are manageable when nothing else is. He was alive. He was sitting in a chair in an airport terminal in Lisbon, holding a form, and he was alive. The form was still in his hands. He had not put it down. It had his name on it printed at the top, because Ana Ferreira had filled in what she could. Marcus Andrew Webb. Date of birth. Passport number. The number that had been flagged, that had been incorrect in some database somewhere, that had triggered a protocol that had kept him on the ground when everything in him had wanted to be in the air. He stared at his name on the form. He thought about the pilot, the tall man with the silver at his temples, who had looked at him with something close to regret and told him he could not board, who had followed a protocol he did not design, who had done the thing that seemed in that moment like an obstacle, like bureaucratic friction, like the specific and exhausting resistance that the world puts between you and the place you need to be. The pilot was gone. He had been on the aircraft. The crew of 8. Marcus sat with that for a very long time. The verification of his identity took 40 minutes in the end. The flag had been a database error, a clerical mistake in an immigration system that had duplicated a report from an entirely different passport number and attached it incorrectly to his. It was, in the language of the report that would eventually be produced, a technical anomaly with no security implications, the kind of error that is embarrassing to discover and simple to correct, the kind that happens in large automated systems with enough regularity that there are procedures for handling it. The error had been placed in the system the previous evening. It had generated the flag at 7:14 in the morning. It had been discovered and resolved by 11:09. The aircraft had gone down at 11:01. 8 minutes. The error that had stranded him at the terminal had been corrected 8 minutes after the aircraft was gone. If the verification had moved faster, if the system had been more efficient, if Ana Ferreira had had the tools to resolve it more quickly, if any of the dozen small frictions in the process had been smoother, he would have been on a later flight to London, routed around the problem, already in the air. He did not let himself do the arithmetic. He did the arithmetic anyway, the way you do things you have told yourself not to do, because the mind does not take instructions from the will in moments like this. He added the minutes and the coordinates and arrived at the same place each time, and each time he arrived there, he put the calculation away, and it came back. He was in Lisbon for another 6 days. The airline arranged accommodation. They arranged support. They arranged the things that are arranged in the aftermath of something catastrophic, the practical scaffolding that holds people up when the ground has gone. Marcus used some of it and did not use other parts of it. The way people are specific about what they can accept and what they cannot in the hours and days after a seismic event. He walked a lot. He walked through Lisbon in a way he had not walked through it in the 9 days before. Not as a visitor, not as a conference attendee with a schedule and a purpose, but as someone who was simply putting one foot in front of the other because that was what his body knew to do. He walked through Alfama in the early morning, when the streets were quiet and the light was low, and the city had the particular quality it has before it becomes itself for the day. He walked along the river in the afternoon. He sat on walls and benches and the steps of churches, and he looked at things, at the water, at the buildings, at the people going about the ordinary and extraordinary business of being alive on a Wednesday, on a Thursday, on a Friday. He called his daughter. She was 17, lived with her mother in Atlanta, and when she answered the phone and heard his voice, she said, "Dad, I saw the news." And her voice had the quality of someone who has been afraid of a thing and is now on the other side of the fear. And he said, "I'm here. I'm okay. I'm here." He called his mother, who was 81 and lived in a small house in Savannah, and who answered the phone with the measured caution of someone who has lived long enough to know that calls from unexpected times are either very good or very bad. He said, "Mama, I'm okay." And she said, "I know, I've been praying since this morning." And he did not ask how she had known to pray, because he understood that this was not a question with an answer that either of them needed. He did not call anyone else for the first 3 days. He was not ready for the other calls, the ones that were not his daughter and not his mother, the ones that would require him to reassemble himself into a version that could speak clearly about something he could not yet speak clearly about. On the 4th day, he called his friend David Chen in Atlanta, who was an engineer like Marcus, and who had the specific virtue of being able to sit in silence on a phone call without filling it with things that did not need to be said. "I keep thinking about the pilot," Marcus said, "the one who turned you away." "Yes." David was quiet. "He didn't know," Marcus said. "He was following a protocol. He looked at me like he knew he was causing me a problem, and he did it anyway because the protocol said to, and now—" He stopped. He didn't know what he was doing. He couldn't have. He was just doing his job. "Yeah," David said. "I was so angry," Marcus said, "standing on that tarmac, walking back to the terminal. I was angry in that quiet way, where you can't say anything because saying anything will make it worse. I was angry at him specifically, at the airline. At whatever system had flagged me, at the whole ridiculous machinery of it." He paused. "He saved my life. He had no idea. He was just doing his job, and he saved my life." David was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Do you think it means something?" Marcus looked out the window of the hotel room at the Lisbon rooftops, at the October sky, at the particular quality of the light in this city that was not like light anywhere else he had been. "I don't know what it means," he said. "I know I'm here. I know I shouldn't be, by any calculation I can make. And I know that the thing that kept me here looked, at the time, like the worst possible thing that could happen." He paused. "I don't know what that means. I'm not sure it has to mean something. I'm just—" He stopped again. "I'm trying to understand how to carry it." David said, "One day at a time, man." "Yeah," Marcus said. "That's about what I've got." He flew home on a Friday. A different airline, a different route, through Madrid, then direct to Atlanta. A longer journey, but one that his body and mind could manage. He sat in his seat and watched the runway at Madrid fall away and felt the particular lurch of a plane committing to the air, that moment where the ground releases you and the sky receives you. And he held on to the armrests and breathed steadily, in and out, because the breathing was the thing. He arrived in Atlanta on a Friday evening in October. His daughter was at the airport. She was standing at the arrivals gate with her mother, his ex-wife, Renee, who had remarried and with whom he had arrived, over years of careful and sometimes painful effort, at something that resembled friendship. And when he came through the doors and saw them both standing there, he stopped walking. His daughter Zoe was 17 and tried not to show things, the way 17-year-olds try not to show things, but she was not succeeding at it now. She covered the ground between them in about 3 strides, and held on to him with both arms in the way she had not held on to him since she was young enough to be carried. And he held her back, and neither of them said anything for a while. Renee stood a short distance away and waited, and when Zoe stepped back, she said simply, "We're glad you're here." "I'm glad I'm here," Marcus said. It was not a profound statement. It was the most precise thing he could manage. In the weeks that followed, Marcus went back to work. He did the things that people do when life has been interrupted and must be resumed: the meetings, the projects, the emails, the ordinary maintenance of a professional existence. He was present for these things in the technical sense of being physically located in a room where they were occurring, while some part of him remained still in the terminal of an airport in Lisbon, watching a plane climb into the pale morning sky. He knew this was normal. He knew that what he was experiencing had a name and a shape and a timeline, that people who survive things others did not survive, through accidents of timing and protocol and database errors, carried a specific and complicated weight that took time to shift. He knew this because he was a thoughtful man who read and reflected, and because he had spoken with one of the counselors the airline had arranged, a woman named Dr. Sofia Baptista, who had sat across from him in a quiet room in Lisbon and explained, without drama, that what he was feeling had a name, and that the name did not diminish it or resolve it, but simply made it recognizable. He went to one session and then another. He found, to his own mild surprise, that talking helped, not in the way he had assumed it would, not as catharsis, but as a kind of mapping, a way of locating himself in the landscape of something vast and disorienting. He thought often about the pilot, not with grief, exactly, though grief was present, with something more complicated than grief, a gratitude so specific and so impossible to direct anywhere that it sat in him like a stone with no place to land. The pilot had not meant to save him. The pilot had been doing a job. The protocol had been the thing, not the man, or the man only as the instrument of the protocol. The pilot was gone, and whatever he had known and meant and intended was gone with him, and all that remained was the outcome. Marcus, alive. Seat 24C, empty. He had looked up the pilot's name. Captain Richard Harlow, 57 years old. Married, 2 adult children. 32 years of commercial aviation, based in London, assigned to this route on a rotation. A profile in the airline's employee magazine from 2 years ago that showed a man at ease in a cockpit, a man who clearly loved what he did and had found a way to do it well for most of his adult life. Marcus had stared at the photograph for a long time, at the face of the man who had looked at him on the tarmac with something close to regret and told him he could not board. He did not know what to do with any of it. He suspected that was the honest answer, that you do not do anything with it, not exactly, that what you do is carry it, that the carrying changes over time, not into something smaller, but into something more integrated, something that becomes part of the structure of who you are, rather than a foreign weight placed on top of it. 6 months after the accident, Marcus attended a memorial service in London. Not the large official one. He had not been able to bring himself to that, the scale of it, the weight of 162 names read aloud. This was a smaller gathering, organized by a group of people connected to the passengers and crew, held in a church in West London on a Saturday in April, when the light was the specific clear light of an English spring. He stood at the back. He did not know anyone. He had not expected to know anyone. He had come because he needed to be in a room where the weight of the thing was acknowledged, where the names were spoken in the specific key of a memorial rather than the key of a news report, where the loss had faces and histories and the quality of a grief that belonged to someone rather than to no one. He heard the name Richard Harlow read. He heard the names of the crew. He heard the passengers. 162 names, spoken one at a time, carefully. He stood at the back of the church, and he was very still, and he was present in a way that he had not been fully present to anything since October. Completely there, in the room, in his body, with the weight of the thing and the light through the windows and the sound of the names. On the way out of the church, a woman stopped him. She was in her 60s, with grey hair and clear eyes, and the bearing of someone who has been through a great deal and found a way to continue. She introduced herself as Margaret Harlow, Richard's wife. Marcus stopped breathing for a moment. "You were on the passenger list," she said. It was not a question. She was looking at him with recognition. "I know the names. I've read the list many times. Your name isn't on it." "No," Marcus said. "I was turned away at the gate." She was quiet for a moment. She looked at him steadily. He had the sense that she had thought about this, about the people who were not on the list, the small number of people who had been on the manifest and then removed from it for one reason or another in the hour before departure. "I thought about you," she said, "about whoever it was, the people who weren't on the plane." "I thought about him," Marcus said. "Your husband. He was the one who—" He stopped. He was not sure how to complete the sentence, how to explain that the man who had cost him his flight had saved his life. Without it sounding like a statement that required a response she was not positioned to give. She seemed to understand without the completion. She reached out and put her hand briefly on his arm, the way people do when words are insufficient and touch must stand in for them. "He was doing his job," she said. "He was always very serious about the protocols. He used to say that protocols existed because somebody died to write them." She paused. "I think he would have wanted you to know that it wasn't personal." "I know," Marcus said. "I knew it then, too. I was angry anyway. I'm sorry for that." "Don't be," she said. "It was right to be angry. You didn't know." They stood for a moment in the April light outside the church, and between them was the impossible weight of what connected them. A gate, a protocol, a flag in a database, a pilot doing his job. And neither of them said anything because nothing they could say would be adequate to what the moment contained. She left first. He watched her walk to a car where a young man was waiting. Her son, he assumed. He watched the car pull away. He stood on the pavement outside the church in the April light, and he breathed steadily in and out. He looked at the sky. It was very blue and very still, the specific still blue of an English spring afternoon. And somewhere in it, invisible and unreachable, were the paths of all the flights that crossed it every day. Hundreds of them, thousands of them, carrying people between the places they had been and the places they were going. He was going home. He had a flight at 6, direct to Atlanta, and he would sit in his seat and feel the ground release him and the sky receive him. And he would breathe, and he would arrive. He had learned, in the months since October, what it meant to arrive. Not just physically, not just the matter of walking through the arrival's gate and finding people who were glad you were there. He had learned what it meant to arrive at a moment, to actually be in it, to let the present tense of a thing be real, rather than always already moving toward the next thing or back toward the last. He had a daughter who was 17 and was becoming someone remarkable. He had work that mattered, that he believed in, that contributed something real to the question of how cities care for their people. He had a mother in Savannah who prayed and knew things she could not have been told. He had friends who could sit in silence. He had a life that was, in the plainest and most important sense of the word, his. A pilot he had never spoken to, following a protocol he had not designed, had looked at him on a tarmac and told him he could not board, had cost him the flight, had cost him an entire day, a meeting, a connection, had turned what should have been an ordinary Tuesday into the worst morning of his life, had saved it. Marcus Andrew Webb picked up his bag. He straightened his jacket. He began walking toward the tube station, toward the train that would take him to Heathrow, toward the plane that would take him home. He walked in the April light, and he was alive, and he knew it. He knew it the way you know things that have been proven, not theoretically, but through the absolute and irreversible evidence of a Tuesday in October, when a database made an error, and a pilot followed a protocol, and the ground held him while the sky did not. He knew it, the way his daughter's arms had felt at the arrival's gate, the way his mother's voice had sounded on the phone, the way the river in Lisbon looked in the morning before the city woke, the way a name sounds when it is spoken in the specific key of a memorial, carefully, by someone who knows the weight of it. He knew it, the way a man knows anything that has been tested, completely without remainder, with the quiet certainty of someone who has stopped taking the knowing for granted. He was going home, one foot in front of the other, in the April light, alive.